Hello, and thank you for joining us once again for another opportunity to provide you with more information on our COVID-19 vaccines as we get closer and closer to providing those first doses of the COVID-19 vaccines for our Henry County employees. I'm JD Harden, Executive Director of Communications and Public Relations for Henry County Schools, and I'm so fortunate to have joining me today two key individuals that will help provide more information to hopefully make you more comfortable with the opportunity to receive your COVID-19 vaccine. First, from our district, I'd like to introduce Dr. April Madden, who is our Chief Family and Student Support Services Officer, and she's also the head of our vaccination strategy team. Say hello, Dr. Madden.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here.
And then, of course, we also have for a return meeting, a return conversation, someone who did such a great time the first time. We're so happy to have her back with us once again, and that's Dr. Jayne Morgan. And for those of you who we didn't get to introduce Dr. Morgan to you last time, let me just tell you real quick. Dr. Morgan is a cardiologist and the clinical director of the COVID task force at Piedmont Henry Healthcare Corporation here in Atlanta in the metro area. We're so happy to have you, Dr. Morgan. Please say hello to everybody.
Hi, thank you. And thank you for having me.
Well, Dr. Morgan, last time we were able to visit with you, we were really trying to educate those who are tuning in and those who continue to watch that other broadcast about the variations or the various the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, which were both the primary vaccines at the time that we knew about for COVID-19 vaccinations. But since then, Henry County Schools was allocated by the state the new Janssen and Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine, which is a single dose vaccine. So today, if that's okay, we'd like to cover a little bit more in-depth information and answer some questions from our Henry County employees about that particular vaccine. And so with that being said, let's get going with the first question. And that first question is, can you tell us really the difference between that particular vaccine and the other two vaccines that people may know a little bit more information about?
So the vaccines really have more similarities. Great question, JD, by the way, and thank you everybody for having me. The vaccines really have more similarities than differences, but there are differences, and one of the main differences is that these vaccines are built on different platforms. And so when we talk about platforms, that's that messenger RNA that you've heard about so often with Pfizer and Moderna. The J&J vaccine is not a messenger RNA vaccine, but it is still a new scientific platform. These are not our old vaccines of killed viruses, what we call attenuated live viruses, where we take the actual virus and weaken it to the point that it's no longer strong enough to cause disease, but it is still viable enough for your body to recognize it and mount an immune response such that you can always protect yourself. Those days have gone by, and we've moved forward to different platforms. So we were introduced to the first scientific platform, messenger RNA with Moderna and Pfizer. And this platform is called the viral vector platform. Now, we've used this platform before. It's used in the development and study of HIV vaccines, but also in the Ebola vaccine, if we can remember the Ebola outbreak, the Zika vaccines. All of these are viral vector vaccines. And what they do is they take a small piece of actually like a common cold. The common cold is a virus. So a small piece of an adenovirus, like the common cold, and use that to transport it into the body where you develop this code for your spike protein. So that's a difference between the two. One has messenger RNA that encodes the spike protein in the body. The other uses a viral vector that transports the code into the body. Both of them are no longer using live viruses. So these are two different platforms, but basically it's two different ways to get the same end result. In the end, we're going to be translating this code with the S protein. The other thing that is different in these vaccines, obviously, and you probably already know that this is Johnson & Johnson is a single dose vaccine, and Moderna and Pfizer are 2 doses. What that means for Moderna, and I was vaccinated with the Moderna vaccine. is that the two doses are 28 days apart, and then there is another 2 weeks in the trials before you reach full immunity, that 95% efficacy. So it takes 6 weeks before you reach immunity. Pfizer is 3 weeks apart, and it took another week, so a full 4 weeks before you reach that immunity level that that was reported by the FDA. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine, because it's a single dose, you only have to wait 2 weeks after that single dose before you reach full efficacy immunity. So Moderna takes you 6 weeks, Pfizer takes you 4 weeks, and now we have Johnson & Johnson that will only take you 2 weeks. And you know, it is important for us to try to develop as much immunity as possible, as quickly as possible, to try to reach this herd immunity, because if not, we continue in this race with the development of these mutations and this replication. So that's a key difference. And the final difference that I would add is that when we talk about, and I know people have been concerned to say Moderna and Pfizer are giving me 95% protection and Johnson & Johnson is only giving me 85% or 72%, but we really aren't comparing apples to oranges. Don't forget, Moderna and Pfizer were first to market. That's a really enviable position to be in, right? You don't really have any competition. You're the first ones. We have 135 companies developing COVID vaccines. Johnson & Johnson is number 3. We have 135. Johnson & Johnson will also be considered a first to market with 135 coming. And what I imagine will happen is that we will have multiple vaccines on multiple platforms with varying indications. Some may be better in the elderly, some may be better in children, some may be better in people with heart failure, some may be better in people within arid geographies where refrigeration is not available. So we may be able to find that there are various differences. So the reason I say we can't really compare these head to head is because Moderna and Pfizer were first to market. When they were doing their clinical trials, all of these new mutations weren't around. So they couldn't test their vaccine against the new mutations that are a little bit more advanced, right? They've had time to learn. In fact, we've had over 3,000 mutations of this virus. So when Moderna and Pfizer were doing their clinical trials, they tested against everything that was in the environment. They didn't exclude it, but those mutations had not developed yet. And the ones when Johnson & Johnson were doing its trials, and it specifically was in South Africa, Moderna and Pfizer were not in South Africa. They were in South Africa where that variant was circulating. That impacted the efficacy of their vaccine. It doesn't mean that it was worse or better. It means that a different strain was in the environment when they were doing their test that Moderna and Pfizer didn't have to test against. If Moderna and Pfizer had to test against that strain, they may also be at 85%, but they were first to market, right? That's always a good position to be in. So they get to have that 95%, but they also didn't test against the virulent strains that are circulating now that Johnson & Johnson had to go up against. So those are sort of the key differences.
Those are huge differences, obviously, for us to be able to share with our audience. You spoke to it a little bit, but I hope you can underscore the importance for our viewers about no matter which one you get, regardless of the efficacy right now of those that are at market. We've heard it said before that it's important that everybody gets vaccinated with one of the vaccines. That the more it happens, the better and quicker we're going to get to the herd immunity. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to explain just a little bit even what herd immunity means and even what efficacy means. So efficacy, we keep hearing this word efficacy. It just means that what has been developed actually does what we say it's going to do. It actually works. It actually, if we say it protects you, then it actually works to protect you. That's called efficacy. And it's graded from 0 to 100. So that's what, and the higher the number, the better it works. So 95% efficacy is a great number. It's closer to 100. So that's what we talk about, this efficacy. And that's why it's hard to compare Johnson & Johnson and Moderna and Pfizer, because Johnson & Johnson demonstrated a lower efficacy, but they also had different strains that were available to it. Additionally, and this gets into even deeper into the weeds, and I won't go much into it, it's very scientific, their endpoints were different, right? So Johnson & Johnson had an endpoint of looking at moderate to severe disease and severe to critical disease. Their endpoints were different than Moderna and Pfizer, where the endpoints were related to symptomatic COVID disease following vaccination. So really two different trials, right? On two different platforms. And so that's where we are. So when we talk about herd immunity, why is herd immunity important? Herd immunity is actually, it's a term in science. We use it in science when we're studying virology, but it actually has its origins in farming and cattle. That's why we get the word herd. It's not a Latin term, right? It's not our usual Latin terminology. It's actually the cows. We call it herd immunity. The reason for that is that farmers recognize, so for instance, cowpox used to be a major threat to cattle farmers. They recognize if a certain percentage of their herd of cattle were immune to cowpox, meaning either they had developed the disease and had survived it and had developed immunity, that all of the herd didn't have to have immunity. They just needed to have a certain percent that was protected, such that if that percentage in your village, in your herd, never gets infected, then they can never pass it on to anybody else who's not immune, because the herd is immune. That's called herd immunity, where enough people in your community, in your herd, have protection that the disease never infiltrates your village, because it can never find a host. So even if you are not immune, you're protected because you live within that herd, and that herd is immune. That's herd immunity. And that's where we're trying to get within our society. That number vacillates anywhere from 70 to 85%. I imagine it's probably going to be closer to 80%, where we have to have immunity such that we can stop the development and the replication of the virus. Remember, we are part of the life cycle of this virus. The human being, the Homo sapien, is a part of the life cycle. It doesn't survive without the host. We're the host. So if we can get up to this level of herd immunity, then the virus can die off. Now we have to think about that as well. The United States is big, the world as well, but let's talk about the United States. We talk about community immunity. So let's say, for example, Henry County decides it doesn't want to get the vaccine. We don't believe in the vaccine. We don't want it. We think we're going to be fine. But up in Decatur, people in Decatur are all in. They want the vaccine, and almost 100% of them get the vaccine, and they have total herd immunity. Everybody's out enjoying themselves. Well, what happens? Even though we have immunity in Decatur, Henry County didn't get immunity. So Henry County now is at risk of developing these new mutations, newer mutations that eventually will spread to Decatur and overcome their vaccinations, which were not developed at the time that these new mutations were developed, because the new mutations developed because there was this one area that refused to get them. And so mutations were able to develop. And more importantly, mutations can begin to learn and develop against the vaccine itself. So that's why we also don't want people partially immunized. We want you fully immunized. So it's important that we all recognize that we're all in this together, and you can't just have pockets of immunity and then the next neighborhood is not immune, because that neighborhood runs the risk of being susceptible to mutations that subsequently develop after you've been immunized, and your vaccine may not work against mutations that are to come in the future. So we've got to get a handle on it so we can get ahead of these mutations. So that's where we are with that. That's herd immunity. That's community immunity. That's where we're trying to go with the vaccination program.
Fantastic. I've got a few more questions, but I know that Dr. Madden has some that have come in from many of our employees. And so I want to toss it over to her to share one of those questions with you.
All right. So one of the questions that I had, if a person has suffered from COVID-19, are they able to get the shot? Would it be anything that would keep them from having the shot?
Right. So we want all people who have had COVID-19, the disease, to move forward with taking the vaccination. And here's the reason why. We only know that you have natural immunity after you have recovered from COVID-19 for 90 days. Beyond that, we are unsure. It's unclear what happens after 90 days. So we want to make certain that you are covered with our vaccination and are not at risk of developing or being a part of the development of further mutations beyond your 90 days. So please, yes, get your vaccines, even if you've had the disease. And something else that I will say is I do these 1-minute videos. They're called Stairwell Chronicles on my social media. And I've done one specifically answering this question. And we answer other questions. I answer them within a minute, but this is a very specific one that I've done. Today I'm taking longer than a minute because I can. But but these questions have been answered in 1 minute, and this is one specifically. So I want to be sure, if you've had COVID-19, we still want you to move forward and get vaccinated. If you're getting Moderna and Pfizer, you've got to get both vaccines because that's how the trials were run. If you're getting Johnson & Johnson, you're sort of one and done.
Great question. And to kind of piggyback off that last statement you just shared, of course, we've heard in previous conversations that you've shared that if of the 2 doses for the 2-dose regimen, that if you only get one, it only provides you certain efficacy up to 50-60%, somewhere around in there, and that it really takes that second dose, which is actually the vaccine, to get that full 95-94% efficacy. But if someone takes the, and of course we know that the efficacy is a little bit lower with Johnson & Johnson, do you ever foresee a time when there would have to be a second Johnson & Johnson dose? And if somebody, is it advisable right now? Has it been studied? Or what would that do to a person if they were to receive that, if that were to happen in the future?
Right. So I think we should think about, again, we're comparing apples to oranges, and not think about Johnson & Johnson as having less of an efficacy than Moderna and Pfizer, but think about Moderna and Pfizer going first when new mutations weren't around. And if the new mutations had been around, their efficacy might be the same as Johnson & Johnson or even less. Johnson & Johnson actually might be better with the new mutation. We don't know. We'll never know because they were all done differently. They were all done separately at different times. So, but we do know that Johnson & Johnson had a steeper hill to climb with the new mutations. What we don't know is how Moderna and Pfizer would have measured up if they had been in the same environment. So that's why it's very hard to compare, right, the two things, apples to oranges. So when we talk about whether or not we'll need an additional shot, we call, these booster shots, it is more likely currently in our current environment that we would have to move towards a 3rd shot for those who've had Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, because those vaccines don't cover the new mutations. And so even though people like me have already had 2 shots, it is foreseeable that we may still need to get a 3rd shot to cover these mutations. People who've had the Johnson & Johnson vaccine are not in that boat because the vaccine was developed when those variants were around. And so currently we're anticipating that that would still be a single dose regimen unless we move towards, like a flu shot, we've got to get it every year. But currently, I wouldn't be surprised if we need to get a 3rd dose for people like me who've had 2. And the only other thing that I will add with the Johnson & Johnson, you might have to move towards a 2nd dose if people don't get vaccinated and we have more mutations develop, and then Johnson & Johnson will be in the same position as Moderna and Pfizer, having to make a new formulation for the mutations that weren't around when they were doing their trials, and then having to call everybody back in to get a 2nd shot.
So I
Without
wanted
doubt,
to,
you're doing. I'm sorry, Dr. Matt. I was just going to let Dr. Morgan know she's doing a great job of answering the questions I was about to ask. So you're doing a fantastic job of that. But Dr. Matt, you had a question. Go right ahead.
yes, I just wanted to go back to the question a little bit about the vaccination after you've contracted COVID-19. Is there an extended period of time that you should wait before you take the vaccination after having recovered from COVID-19?
So the answer to that is yes and no. So I'm going to start with the yes. The yes is everybody who's had COVID-19 should follow up with getting the vaccine, any of the vaccines, Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, or Pfizer. If you've had COVID-19, you probably have immunity for 90 days. So you don't need to rush right out to get it, but you still can get it within those 90 days for sure. We definitely don't want you to go beyond that. So that's the yes answer. The no answer is if you had COVID-19 and you had to be treated with an IV infusion of either monoclonal antibodies or convalescent plasma, then you must wait 90 days before you get your vaccine. So you would know that because you would have been in an outpatient setting, not in a hospital, and they would have put an IV into your arm and run a bag of fluid in these IV infusions. If that was part of your COVID treatment, then you may not receive the vaccine until you are beyond 90 days. If that was not part of your treatment, you can really get it at any time once your symptoms have resolved, but beyond 90 days, it's unclear whether you're immune. So we want you to get it earlier than that. So that's the yes and no answer to that. And by the way, I also did a 1-minute sterile chronicle on that one too, so you guys can follow that in Spanish as well.
So I was going to ask, since you keep talking about that Stairwell Chronicle and your social media for our viewers, would you please care to share what your handles are on your social media platforms?
Yes, so you can find me under Dr. Jayne Morgan, DrJayne Morgan, all one word, Dr. Jayne Morgan on either Instagram, Twitter, or LinkedIn. And I generally run these videos and do other informational things with regard to science. It's generally all science-based. Yeah. So if you're looking for credible sources of scientific information, that's really the point of me running these social media sites, such that people have a place to go for credible scientific information. It's just the scientific information. That's all it is. You can take it or leave it. It's just the science.
I was going to say, consider it a consultation without the copay. All right. Right. So we appreciate that. Of course, I do want to make it clear that the question earlier about whether or not there would be a future requirement for a second dose of Johnson & Johnson was just a question that had been posed. The guidance is still one dose, and that's what we are planning to give to those employees of ours who have signed up to receive it. And so we look forward to moving into that phase. Now, one thing I want to jump into here let me
just add one thing, JD. I'm going to add, don't forget the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was tested against the current strains. Moderna and Pfizer were not. So that's why, Johnson & Johnson's right now is just a single dose, and Moderna and Pfizer are looking at the third dose because, it wasn't, those strains weren't along. So the Johnson & Johnson has a lot of advantages. Yeah.
Perfect. And we know that there will probably be many more Stairwell Chronicles in conversations as further vaccines start coming out. But, a couple of vaccines, obviously the information that's being shared across the country is that numbers continue to go down. And I think a lot of people can draw a direct correlation between the increasing number of people being vaccinated and, of course, some of those numbers going down. And we know that probably there's a little bit of a tendency of people to let their guard down, thinking that we are moving into and back to a normal society like we were this time a year ago almost. But there's been some recent information that's come out by the CDC about the requirements for masks and telling in some instances that it may be okay not to do it if multiple people have been vaccinated within the group that's kind of gathering. Give us your take from the medical side of things about the need to keep wearing masks to ensure that we're as safe as possible until that point, which the medical community says, hey, we're where we need to be at this moment.
Right. Yeah. So we are, in the scientific and medical world, really bracing for this next surge that we expect will be coming as people develop COVID fatigue. This is not an actual medical condition that you need to go to the emergency room for. It's mental. It's just mental that everybody's tired and they're sort of over it and don't want to do it. But we need to kind of hang in there a few more months while we build this herd immunity. And we are, it's moving slowly, but we can try to get there by the end of the summer. And that means we have to continue utilizing our public health measures. The mask is incredibly important, and distance, and making certain that our hands are clean such that we're not touching our face and that type of thing, even touching our mask and getting our mask dirty. So we want to be clear about that. The CDC did provide some good news, and it really was not as extensive as I thought. They sort of, kind of gave us three things, and I would have hoped for a list of 15, but we have 3 little freedoms. If you have received your full vaccination, so that means you are 6 weeks in the Moderna from the first vaccine, 2 weeks beyond the second. When you have done 4 weeks of Pfizer and 2 weeks of Johnson & Johnson, then you are free to visit other vaccinated people indoors, maskless. So we can start to develop our vaccination pods, our vaccination friends, like our maybe sororities and fraternities. Either you're in or you're out. And so if you are with other people been vaccinated, you can socialize with them. If you are visiting a single household that is a low risk household and you have been fully vaccinated, then you can go there as well, maskless. And I think that goes into if grandparents are visiting grandchildren. The children by and large have been at home during, school has been out. They haven't really been at school. They've been pretty much in a closed environment with their families in that single house. They haven't done much. If they've been out, they've had on masks. So you have to determine if where you're going is a low risk single family household and you've been vaccinated. There's no, single family household police out there. So you've got to make that determination. It's got to be a low risk household. People are not practicing high risk behaviors. One person in the family who's a partier every Friday night throws off the whole low risk household. That is no longer a low risk household. But you're able to go to a low risk household, and that's your assessment, and be maskless, and also be able to hug and touch those people. The CDC still is advising against airline travel, and really fairly strongly against airline travel this month and next month, as we prepare for what we think is going to be another surge, but primarily because, and I know I keep coming back to this, we are trying to get ahead of the mutations. And the more people move around and interact and are in public environments, the more opportunity the virus has to continue to learn and mutate and change.
Fantastic. Dr. Madden, what other questions do we have from our employees?
So I think you pretty much, like I said, JD, she forecast a lot of the questions and answered them ahead of time. Don't want to repeat, but just the safeness, I think, of the vaccine. Like, okay, some people feel that this one, like I said, isn't as safe as the other. What I would pretty much like, versus a question, but more so of a statement from you. Would you share to our audience what, looking at the work that Henry County has done to prepare for this opportunity for their staff, can you give your opinion or your statement or scientific statement? How safe and how prepared do you feel ready to go in saying that the staff should possibly consider participation in this endeavor, making sure that they get vaccinated?
That's a great question. And I really want to start by just congratulating you, Dr. Morgan, and Jade, and you, Dr. Madden, and JD, on all of the work that you guys have done, the progress in getting this ready and moving this forward. You know, that's been phenomenal because it's had to be done in a very short amount of time. So congratulations really to both of you on that. When we look at the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, the safety profile is fairly similar to that of the flu vaccine, the same as Moderna and Pfizer. An area in which Johnson & Johnson, another area, I think I've named a couple of things they have an advantage. They have an advantage as well with regard to their enrollment of African Americans in this trial. And they enrolled about 13%, and we're 13.4% of the population. And I think Pfizer was 9.3 to 9.8%, Moderna's 10.3, but Johnson & Johnson has a representation of 13%. And when you roll in Africans that were also in this trial, it's over 19% of people of African heritage. And so I think that that is phenomenal. And we can feel confident if you're in one of those communities that the vaccine profile, the data that was gathered, and the approval by the FDA for that emergency use authorization is relevant to your population. It was also a significant representation of the Hispanic population as well. And so I think in that way, they've done a great job, and we should not take that for granted because this is not business as usual. Prior to 2020, we did not really see African Americans enrolling in trials for a number of reasons. And so this is another company, the same as Moderna and Pfizer, that are rolling out these vaccines that really moved purposefully and intentionally to make certain that there was representation from the mosaic of America that we would be serving. And not only that, the mosaic of the world. This is a global pandemic. And they made an effort to ensure that people from every population were included, including Japan. They ran a separate study in Japan to make certain that different populations, and whatever may be specific to those populations, were included in this data. And I think Johnson & Johnson can be applauded for that. And in that way, they actually really exceeded what Moderna and Pfizer have done. You know, as I said, though, it's sort of like being the older brother or the older sister, right? The younger ones learn. So Moderna and Pfizer went first, and Johnson & Johnson realized, you know, they learned, say, okay, they did that, but they didn't quite make the mark, so we can do it better. And I think that's what we'll see as well in successive vaccines that come out. But they actually really 13% African Americans, and then overall over 19% of people of African background globally. Yeah. So I think that's something, you know, that we need to consider. The other thing that is interesting to know of the J&J vaccine is their experience in women who are pregnant and in reproduction. And even though we're talking about this new platform of viral vectors, it's not as new as messenger RNA. So this is the first time we're actually using messenger RNA, but the viral vector vaccines have been used before in our Ebola virus, our Zika virus, in the work to develop HIV. So we have actually, you know, over 1,500 women pregnant who've actually not necessarily gotten the COVID vaccine viral vector, but they've gotten other viral vector vaccines from Johnson & Johnson, meaning Ebola and Zika. And so there's a wealth of information on pregnant women and reproduction on this platform, even though it's not specifically on this vaccine. So that's something to think about as well. With this vaccine, there were 8 unintentional pregnancies. And so these women, because we did not enroll pregnant women in the trials, but there were 8 women who ended up pregnant. And so the same as Moderna, who had, I think, 23 women, Pfizer had 13, Johnson & Johnson had 8. All of these women's pregnancies will be followed out, and quite a few have already delivered, and there haven't been any deleterious effects. So that's something to think about as well, because I know there have been questions about reproduction. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine not this particular COVID, but the same platform that they've used COVID, they've used it to develop other vaccines. Those other vaccines have developed quite a wealth of information on pregnant women and reproduction.
Well, Dr. Morgan, I'll say that you have done a phenomenal job of walking us through so many of the particulars regarding the Janssen Johnson & Johnson vaccine. I think the importance of these vaccines can be evidenced in the fact that we have major pharmaceutical companies coming together to make these productions happen. So I know that is something that is groundbreaking on many, many fronts. One more opportunity, anything that we didn't get a chance to ask specifically, or something you feel is important to kind of further drive home the point about, of course, our Johnson & Johnson vaccines and the importance of receiving a COVID-19 vaccine?
Yeah, I think, just the importance is for people to remember about the mutations, and that we have to consider that not only for our progress, but if we never get ahead of the mutations, the COVID continues to stay with us and we continue to have these restricted lives. So it's important that everybody not only protect yourself, but in doing so, you protect others. One of the things that we have seen in all of the vaccines is that in people who are vaccinated, even if they were to come in contact with COVID or are in that 5% or 8% that end up contracting it with another virus, your course of your disease is much milder, but also more importantly, your viral load is lower, meaning that you're carrying fewer viral particles because you've been immunized. Therefore, if you were to infect someone else, their disease is a milder course because you provided less inoculum to them, less viral load, less viral particles. So not only does it help us to reduce COVID-19, it also helps if you were to get COVID-19, it helps you to stay healthy and out of the hospital and have an uneventful recovery and have a much milder course. So you have to think about those kinds of things as well.
Fantastic. I'll tell you what, every time we talk to you, I walk away feeling so much smarter and so much more knowledgeable about things that I really feel like I can go out and have a conversation, because so often the science behind things can oftentimes fly over people's heads, and you do a phenomenal job of really breaking it down in digestible pieces for everybody to consume. And so thank you so very much for the time you spent today. Dr. Madden, do you have any parting thoughts before we wrap this thing up?
I just want to thank Dr. Morgan for coming back and visiting with us. She's a public view favorite out there, and we just want to thank you for coming back and sharing time with us. You have been incredible, and we've appreciated this information, and I think it will help our community, our school community, be more informed and be able to make a decision based on the information that you provided. So thank you so much, and we appreciate you.
Great. I love it. I hope it's been helpful. I want all of us to sort of reclaim our lives. And, we've got a path forward to doing that, to returning ourselves to some semblance of normalcy. So listen to the science and then make a decision based on information.
Correct. One more time, those handles for your social media platforms for people who want to follow you.
Yes, at Dr. Jayne Morgan, Dr. Jayne, and Jayne has a Y in it, Jayne, Morgan, Morgan, Dr. Jayne Morgan, Twitter, Instagram, or LinkedIn.
Please go follow her. You will not be disappointed. And for those who, if you have bilingual friends who speak different languages, she does a phenomenal job of speaking different languages to share out her information. So again, we can't say thank you enough. And to our viewers who are tuning in, thank you so very much for the time and attention you've given to this very important matter. We look forward to being able to provide vaccines to all of the employees who have chosen to receive one, and those who may be watching this this and have started changing their mind. We know that there are a few hundred who have done so since the last time we've had Dr. Morgan on with us. And in doing so, we are working to accommodate requests for vaccines. So stay tuned for more information about that. But thank you so very much for tuning in, Dr. Morgan and Dr. Madden. Thank you for participating. And we look forward to bringing you more information in the coming days. Stay tuned to our website, the COVID-19 Vaccination Toolkit website, or our district website for more information. We hope you have a great rest of your day.
Bye.